or through this question of game and play is like you're a game builder if you think of directing that way. Game builder, or one who tries to create the space and atmosphere for play. And it is difficult because we tend to think it is easily as work, as Kake said. So one of my own mistakes in the beginning was that I can say everything is possible to the working group. Now everything is possible, we can suggest and play together. But I soon noticed that when you say that everything is possible, then nothing is possible. People get freeze. They cannot start with their creation if there's no limits. So you have to create rules or boundaries that will give the opportunity to start being creative. It's a little bit same as you said, Kake, that you have to start with something. You cannot start from empty space. So in the beginning, I was a little bit confused with this idea of why people get sad and angry when I don't tell them what to do, or well, not tell them what to do, but to create these rules. So defining the rules so that we can play together could be one way of saying what the director does, in fact. Create space where people feel that they know enough rules to be able to make contribution or start to play or even change the rules. And that pleasure thing is very important in play. So that's why I also think about playfulness many times, and I try to create this feeling of, one thing I do as a director is I try to do mistakes in the beginning to define the rules or what you can do, and then to make this feeling that when you're playing, it's okay to try out and make mistakes. That's part of how we create new rules, you know, that you kind of try, oh, this doesn't work. So this wasn't very conscious in the beginning, but I noticed that in the beginning of rehearsal period, I tried to make mistakes. It's a difficult art because you cannot make it in a way where you kind of slander the people very easily. If you do kind of stupid mistakes, and you can also do this stupid, so people are like, no, this is not very inspiring, but you have to do it for real in a way. But how to make mistakes, meaning to make mistakes, it's difficult. But to create that kind of space where you can make mistakes as a director, then all the other people also can make mistakes and play with the rules. And the pleasure that comes from making, bending and breaking the rules is in the heart of any creative process. So that's why I try to make mistakes, to make it clear that everybody can test and bend the rules and then make new rules. I have a wonderful experience from my own years of study. I was then studying in Metropolia, or Stadia it was called then, and we have this clown teacher, Philippe Gaulier from France, who is now over 70 years old, grandmaster of clownery. And his way of working was to be in fiction. So he came and he was this very severe schoolmaster. He had this role. Really, he was a very nice guy, but he came and he was like, you're not going to talk behind my back at all. And you're not going to, and you have to stand here and be absolutely quiet. And no one can move. And then he would turn and do something else and check if we were doing it. And then he would have different punishments. It was shampoo, so he would do something with our hair. Or then this kind of, that he would vääntää kättä, like do this thing, a Chinese massage it was called, with your arm. And then was third one, I don't remember. And then when he would see someone doing something, he would, was it you or was it her? Is it, and like we start to, oh, no, it was her. And then, okay, you can say the punishment to her now. And is it Chinese massage? Is it shampoo? And then we would give. So he would start this play where we turn into kids that tried to make all the funny things behind her back and like punish each other, and and we turned into clowns by this situation and these rules that he created. And he was a little bit scary, in fact. We were a little bit like really scared, like children. And this was kind of working from fiction. So he created this play where there was hierarchies. He was the schoolmaster. We were a little bit afraid of him, and we were trying to bend the rules. And so making kind of very strict rules and this hierarchical, but fictional hierarchy, Of course there was real hierarchy also because he was our teacher, but kind of emphasizing maybe this hierarchy in this playful way, he turned us into clowns. So I think this is a very nice example of how you can kind of use fictional situation in a teaching or in creative process. And I have another example from my school years in theater academy, and this was also kind of, I didn't think it very logically, but I created a situation we were playing that we were hypnotizing one another. So this was a game. We didn't actually know how to hypnotize, but we agreed that now we are going to rehearse, so I'm going to put you into sleep and talk with soft voice. And then I count from 10 to 1, and when you wake up, you're not going to be Suopo, you're going to be your sivupersona, another person inside you. And then I'm going to start interviewing you, and you're going to tell me who you are. So let's try, but I count, and then came new personas, and then we discussed with these personas asking, okay, what do you want to do? We are going to do this performance, so your persona might now be called Pekka. So Pekka, what do you want to do with this performance? So this persona would tell, okay, I want to make some baking here and talk. Okay, that's nice. So soon there's going to come audience, so can you do? So we kind of went into this fictional play where we could create these personas and then negotiate with them that they could be. So it was kind of all play and fiction, but it was very, there was no kind of limit between the rehearsing and the performance because it was just the way we were playing, and then the audience came and we continued hypnotizing and there came these characters. So these two examples could be way of that we can create a play or a game or a kind of fictional situation that can turn into a performance, so we don't have to have this separation. But how to create this is, of course, a very interesting question. And how to, yes, well, well, maybe I say one more thing before I go there, because I think paradoxically, the clearer hierarchies there are, the funner the game or the play is. Because there's some kind of, because there are anyway hierarchies in our situations, in our group situations, and those hierarchies tend to stop us from being creative because we are afraid of being kind of embarrassed or giving a wrong answer or doing the wrong thing and being thrown out of the game somehow. But then if you make the hierarchy like part of the play, in a sense, like in this Philippe Collier example, or like in this one that I said, I'm now hypnotizing you, so I take the responsibility that something strange comes out of you. So then exactly this hierarchy makes it easier to let go of hierarchy. It's a paradoxical thing. And this is something I'm sometimes afraid of, because now we are kind of, or worried, afraid is maybe a strong word, worried because we are now talking about these flat structures and dividing authorships and being really democratic all the time. So the problem is that people might get scared that, everyone is responsible of everything and taking everything very seriously and not being able to play. So contradiction here is very interesting contradiction, is that to create these kind of understandable and clear hierarchies might be a very good way to play. But how to, of course, change the hierarchies and not always the same person maybe being the one who is, I don't know, but this is very interesting question. So you might not get to this very creative and playful space by taking all the hierarchy away or saying that there is no hierarchy, if you know what I mean. Yes, so game and play as the strategies for shared authorship is the next thing. So this is what I already mentioned, that we are now talking about this, that how can we share authorship, of course, and how it doesn't have to be that, if there is a line, so if here is the director that will tell everyone what to do and even tell how they should do it, and if in another end of this line is a group that will work with total shared authorship, so no one is claiming more authorship than the other, so everyone is sharing it. So there are different ways of working here in this line in between, and this of course offers a great challenge to the work of the director, because if before she had to know one way of working, now she has to know kind of 10 different ways of working, and of course there are different every time you start with a new group, I think nowadays you as a director and the people in a group, we have to define how we are going to work, how we're going to share. Of course, sometimes the structure will kind of define it in a way. So if you have very limited time, for example, you have a ready-made text, you have things you have had to do, a lot of things before the actors come, for example, there's not that much sharing to do anymore, in the sense that if you can come together and just start from scratch, start to ask, how are we going to have a performance and what kind of performance, then of course you have much more freedom also to define this hierarchy and how are you going to share the work and the decisions that are made. But anyway, I think game and play are very important strategies in this shared authorship question. So now many of my students are talking about task-based work, so that the idea that as a director you don't really decide what's going to be on stage or what's being created, but you give different tasks to the working group. So many of you certainly have been working like this, but that can be also seen as a way of defining the rules of the play or a game. So you could say, you could find an object that would be small enough to swallow but can still tell a story or whatever. So you give some kind of game or play task, and then people come with those and we start doing something with them. And of course, a score can also be seen as a kind of a way of writing a game, or I think it's interesting to think what are the similarities between a score and some computer programming kind of thinking that leave a lot of space to changing things, but then give a certain structure to the coming performance in this case. And of course, score is one way also to leave space for chance, as Kake was talking about chance, or this, how can we create dramaturgies that have space for chance. Working in fiction was something I already talked about, so like Philippe Gollier example or my hypnotizing example, that you actually start from fiction or game, and that is already kind of the performance, that you just play it as long as the audience comes, and then you just start continue playing with them. Of course, the question is when the spectator turns into co-creator, if you do this working in fiction, for example, like Philippe Gollier did, that doesn't necessarily, of course, mean that the performance itself will be somehow playing with audience. It doesn't mean, can be that we are all playing with together and you are watching. So the question, of course, comes then that how do we turn the spectator into a co-creator or someone to play with? So how do we make and define the rules of the game interestingly and creatively, and even how can we change the rules inside a performance so that the audience can follow? So the problems here, if we first start thinking about these hierarchies, that we are trying to lower the hierarchies maybe, or between maybe director, dramaturgy or playwright or whatever, and the working group. But then we can also think, how can we lower the hierarchy between the spectator and the performer so that they could play in the same level? That's the kind of the same question, but it also has the, if we are going to lower the hierarchies, normally the problem is, of course, that the performers know more of the game, of the rules, than the spectator. She doesn't know how this game is going to be. So she has the thought that I'm going to come there and sit and look. But then if we're going to make a new set of rules, it's very interesting and precarious situation, because easily you get told, no, you can move freely in the space. This is the most common I hear nowadays when I go to performance. They say, you can freely move in the space. And I feel I can't, but I feel that there are some rules anyway, but you don't maybe say it. And if I start to experiment, do I do something wrong? So there is this, that when we start to change the rules, so how can we communicate them? Also without maybe speaking and saying these 10 commandments you can now do in this performance. So this is for me a very interesting question, that how can we invite people into a play in a way that they can recognize something? So our lecturer Eki Vuori, he's searching like ritualistic theater and performance. So there is the idea that we have some rituals that we actually recognize very easily. For example, wedding, or I don't know, funeral, or something very basic rituals that we might. So this is one answer maybe that Eki has given me when we have discussed this, that you could set up a situation or a game that has some kind of ritualistic moment that you kind of recognize and can join in. And that would be one way of creating situations where audience can start to play without having to read a book about the rules of the performance. So like funeral or maybe dinner. Dinner could be, shared meal could be this kind of ritual, or I don't know, football game with some strange football, or you could try to find that ritualistic element that we can join in. Well, and practicing playing the audience is also a new thing that comes out of this thing. So it isn't enough that we practice together as a working group, but if we go to this playing and gaming, we have to also include practicing with audiences. And that's something one tends to forget when it comes. So we try once with our friends before that come and be our tryout audience, and then they know us and they are very nicely there. And then when real audience comes, we're like, oh, that's what they are doing, and we are very confused. So in this kind of playing and gaming, I think you have to have a lot of time in practice time to actually practice playing with audiences who actually are not your friends or not theater professionals, but people who just really want to sit down and watch. So then comes the real challenge of how are they going to read and react and understand this situation or ritual or game or play you have created. And I think that is very interesting, because it never is what you really expected. And very small things can actually come in a way of interaction or playful interaction. Very small things, like I was in a Baltic Circle in a performance where they just asked us to take their shoes, our shoes away. And in my group of students, there was, I really hate when I have to take my shoes. So they got a little ruined for her in a way that they just say, and then here starts the nice free space, but first you have to leave your shoes here. And she was like, I don't want. So it's like, it's very, very concrete, very, very gentle and precarious situation where you start negotiating a play with someone who wasn't exactly maybe prepared to play. So it's like, how do you start this? So I don't know, I think it's a very interesting question, but of course we have many examples, like clownery is one very good example. They do it every time. They kind of take you with them in a game. Of course it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, sometimes you go also on the stage, but it's a lot about contact and understanding the situation where the audience is or where they are coming from and with what expectations they are coming. And when you understand the expectations, you can start to play with those expectations. So for example, if they come in, spaces also have expectations. So for example, if you're in National Theatre and you have fixed seats, and then you just twist something a little bit, just a little bit, that might be a sign that you invite into a play. So I think for me as a director, thinking about play with audience, I always think, what is their expectation of the space situation of the makers? How can I start to twist that a little bit so that they start feeling that, oh, maybe it's dizziness effect, but this, and then when they get a little bit dizzy but not too dizzy, so then they might be ready to try something. But if they just come and sit and are there, and then it's lost case. So you have to kind of twist a little bit and start making this suggestion that something else might happen or this play might begin with, yeah. And for example, I can say one example just to, in spaces, it's like, how do you come in a space? It's already kind of, I was thinking that you could, for example, give untrue kind of suggestions of the space where you're coming to. Like you would say that when you come in, you will find this and this, and then you come in and you don't. It's not there what they said. So that's, for example, is already a gaming situation. Kind of, you have to solve something. You become active, even if I don't want to. But they said that here is a chair and I have to sit, but there's no chairs. What is this? Do I have to look behind those curtains? So I mean, mostly in the conventional theater, we are kind of worried that we are going to let down or disappoint the expectations of a spectator. They say, of course, we promised them Myrskyluodon Maija, they have to get Myrskyluodon Maija. I mean, some classic. But I think here in gaming, it's about twisting the expectation and making it a little bit different, so someone has to start working with how do I solve it, this gap between my expectation and then what's actually starting to happen. And I think one of the most beautiful and surprising experiences and performances for me have worked just like this. I have come with some expectation. It was, okay, then I'm already doing something and I'm a little bit behind, but still able to work. So this is very interesting situation for me as a participator or spectator.
You have 10 minutes.
Yes, I think this was it. Was my last slide. So, if there's anything you want to comment or ask?
Notions, questions?
Well, I'm from Holland, I'm always very reactive.
Yes.
My culture, so.
Yes.
I really recognize what you're saying, and what helped us a lot is the notion of levels of participation. So it's not a singular thing, you either act or you don't. But you create levels of participation. So people who tend to or love to be more like spectators, there's a place for them. And others who are a minority, who really like to dive in all the way, are given different scenarios. So I think it's always helpful to not design a singular form of co-creation, but to have levels that people can choose from to make it more comfortable in the practice.
Yeah, and that would of course be dramatically interesting, because then there would be very different kind of experiences from the whole performance. Yes.
Just a comment on this, that's kind of the model in big, massive computer games. They actually design different kind of modes of participation, and they usually tend to emphasize on the most active players, and then they leave the more passive ones aside, because that makes the game develop more fast if you emphasize on the active ones.
Yeah, so what might be helpful is look at transmedial storytelling tradition, immersive theater, of course, but also you have in Scandinavia this wonderful art LARP scene that are thinking about this already for 20 years. So when you talk about designing rules for participation, they're very elaborate in how to approach that from a directing perspective.
And reflecting that what Mikko said, that it's also this idea of boredom that Kake was talking about. It's also like if you're only influencing on this kind of hard action, it becomes just like this kind of fast action politics of that happening or performance. And that's not all about it. It's also of boredom or long-lasting things. How to combine or these kind of different spectatorships. I was thinking when you were talking about this American actor, director, researcher Steve Dixon, who has like listed 4 levels of the interaction, like navigation, participation, conversation, and collaboration. And especially thinking about this collaboration in the sense that you were talking about the how to deal with the audience. So it's then actually how to reach that kind of collaborative level, that it's in order to have some rules or frame of where to operate.
Yeah, we have sometimes, when I've done some this kind of community work, then it's like you both said that there are some people who are really in it, creating it more, and then there are the who just kind of more just come and play it, you know. It's difficult to have really big groups of participating in the creation of a certain performance, but of course if you could do that partly online, for example, then it could be also like easier. But if you think that actually we have to be here and create together, so then the amount of people who can participate is limited. I was also thinking I've done forum theater, which is a kind of a, well, you probably know Augusto Boal's system of and there is the idea of co-actor, but that's like we just had the course of societal and participatory theater now this fall, but there's something frustrating for the students because in forum theater it has to be like a character to be able to make forum, because otherwise you cannot come in and play that character. It leaves too much open. And now many people are interested in making performances without characters, so they feel that, why do I have to use characters? But that is, like I was just explaining, that this is the game. So to recognize a character is needed in forum theater to be able for anyone to come up and play that character. So you could twist it somehow, and it doesn't have to be narrative in that sense that there would be a story, but some situations where you can understand how the character is reacting is needed to be able to then share this playing of the character. So I think one thing is that if you want to make participatory performances, you have to really make it so, in a sense, simple in that, how do we say, we tend to want to make complicated, interesting performances. But if you want to have a participatory part, you have to make these parts so simple that people can really understand what they are getting into. And this I see in my young students is like frustrating. I have to make something very simple, but to make simple isn't easy, also. So to make something recognizable and simple isn't easy. It's a long way of thinking and creating and narrowing it down. But I see that this is one thing that makes it. Artistically ambitious young people sometimes feel that, why does it have to be so simple to be able to, yeah.
And then there is also the problematic of using the audience as a guinea pigs in a sense that you have this defined outcome and you have to kind of coax the right behavior out of the audience in order to get to the to the point that you have devised beforehand.
That's right.
Yes.
And that's why I said practicing with the audience, because then the actual interaction can affect the way the performance turns out to be. So that's not really participatory or co-creation, because then you have designed, and that's why we have talked about violence in the work of director in how do you, it might be very violent to say this is, you can go anywhere you want in this space, and then you feel that don't go there. Or, like there are rules that you have made, and then you try to say that this is really free co-creative space. So that's not true. That's not honest. So this is very interesting. How can we be honest with our expectations to understand the expectations of the audience and then bring them together and play with those? Yes.
Or how to encourage the mutiny, like you were explaining.
Yeah, encourage the mutiny.
But of course it was inbuilt there in a situation that it was raising the level that people want to mutinize the action.
Yes, but the mutiny was so beautiful. I was like, because we're always in participatory theater, we are a little bit afraid of what the audience is going to do. But in that Philippe Gollier example, it was like he wasn't afraid. He was like encouraging us to be tottelemattomia. What is it like?
Disobedient.
Disobedient. And there that the play begins. So how could we make a performance where the audience is like, I can like be mutinous here, I can do what? Yeah.
Basically, he was doing rules. So you need all the time to have rules and methods how to give audience an equal possibility to contribute something to the play.
Yes.
Is that?
Yes, and he was kind of, there's this, that you have to have the security and the danger at the same time. So he was this very strict Kulma. He was punishing us but then we got wilder and wilder because he was so, there was this balance of he's going to take care that it doesn't go just totally out of hand, also this feeling, but then we can try the limits here. So that was...
Yeah, I'm listening, it's really interesting. I was thinking about the kind of like the boundaries between game and play. If game has like strict rules and games can break, if you break the rules, the game won't work.
Yeah.
And in these kind of performance situations, you have these kind of game-like situations, but you also want the games to break and shift into play, so that you have this situation where anything can happen, where they're kind of like the rules can bend, but then you somehow want to come back to the game as well at some point, so that it has more meaning it needs to function.
Yeah.
Because the play needs people's, they have to volunteer for it. They
Yeah.
have to kind of like give more than in a game. In a
Yeah.
game you can just follow the rules and everything will work out.
That's
But
right.
in play you have to invest more.
Yeah, and that's where it gets messy, like Kake said, that we want to have co-creation, but then we don't want to have the mess, but the mess will follow, and there will always be surprising situations. So for me in Forum Theatre, what is very interesting that there is this live director present that is called Jokeri, the Joker, that is the actors who are doing it, but the Joker is all the time following the situation, making new rules and ideas how we continue from here. And that's the most difficult part to play in a Forum Theatre situation. So it's live directing. So it's like, okay, now you made that suggestion, okay, but now you came here and made, okay, now we have to do. So it's like reacting all the time and like changing. Of course, there are a set of rules and we have practice, but then this situation is totally unknown and scary.
Okay, now
Yes.
closing the. Thank you, Saana.
Yes.